Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we have a 480 on the bench. It's an early first generation unit, either 94 or 95, I'm not exactly sure which yet, but basically the story here is that it's out of a late 90s GMT 400 truck, Silverado 1500, that has a 5.3 twin turbo and making right now about 500 horsepower. That's where he usually keeps the boost, but he can turn it up to where it'll make close to 700 horse. So this transmission's failed twice inside of a year, and the primary complaints are harsh 1-2 shift, especially when cold, as well as a a lot of noise coming from the front of the transmission. He's not exactly sure, maybe pump, maybe something else. So whoever went through it first, it was in the vehicle for, I guess, a few months, and it had to come back out for warranty work. And then when I went back in, shortly thereafter, it had problems again. So I guess he had enough dealing with other shops, so he's asked me to kind of take it down, go through it, and let him know what exactly was done to it, and he'll compare that to based on what was on the build sheet or what was promised, and just for his own kind of edification, if you will, and see what exactly was done to the unit. So a couple things I expect to see here. One, a dual feeded direct clutch. Anything that's performance oriented, these transmissions are TH400s, you always want to dual feed that clutch. I also expect to see valve body mods, spacer plate, orifice sizing, lube modifications, etc. I'll go through each of the individual things that I would do as we move through the transmission. So let's go ahead and get a little bit closer and we'll get started. Alright, I've already removed the rear seal, so whoever built the unit used like an aftermarket bolt kit or something to that effect. So this is a 17mm bolts are normally 15. So 2004 and up, they changed the extension housing to have it accept a wider diameter bushing. So if you're purchasing a bushing kit, the 04 and up extension housing bushings for the two-wheel drive units, that bushing will not be included in the kit. You got to purchase that separately. It's a Durabond bushing. At least that's the one that I buy. So just FYI for those working on those 04 and up units that are not maybe used to them. So no real way to tell by eye. The inner diameter is the same for all years. It's the outer diameter that changed. Okay, so here's the seal. This thing is in park. That could be a billet output shaft. If so, that's good on the builder for installing one. That's what you want to do. In applications making, in that 700 horsepower regime on up. So 10mm on the speed sensor bolts, at least with this kit. They're normally 8mm. That one was loose. And I'm going to have to put washers on these because they're digging into the the mounting bracket. So these speed sensors are new. So again, replacement of electronics is a must for all of these transmissions. 4L80s, 4L60s, it doesn't matter what transmission you're working on. If it's electromechanically controlled, you want to make sure that you replace all of your electronics. Never reuse them. Alright, let's see what kind of front end play we have. So for the 4L80s, you're going to measure travel in at least two places inside the case. You're going to have a rear end play spec and a front end play spec. And then you also have to measure the spacing or the play between the snap ring that holds the input shaft to the overdrive carrier. You have to measure that because when you pull and push on this, that's going to be included in what you measure, but it's not supposed to be included in the end play. So it's usually 26 to 28 thousandths in all my years of doing these. That's kind of the range I've seen, maybe 29 thousandths, but you want to have between 6 and 20 thousandths in the rear, and I want to say between 8 and 25 thousandths in the front. And you want to have more end play in the front than you do in the rear. Ideally, roughly twice the amount of end play that you have versus the rear for the front. and that's net of that snap ring. This actually feels kind of tight, but you know, we'll see once we get inside if it truly is or not. So 13 millimeter on these bolts. I like the pink marking. I guess he did that either for show or to indicate the bolt was torqued, or both. Alright, looks like we got some caps or whatever to hold fluid in. It's got A&N fittings on the cooler line. So if you're working on a 97 and up unit, you're going to have your center lube design. That's the return cooler line fitting will be somewhere around here. Goes right into the center support. Make sure you take that fitting out first before you start going through the case, because if you don't, then the gear set in the rear, starting with the center support, will never come out. It'll be held in place by that rear cooler line fitting because it kind of goes into the center support itself. And I have like no dexterity here, so alright, let me take that out of park. I like to spin the shafts too to make sure nothing's bound up. And this seems to spin nice and free. I don't feel any drag, any noticeable drag, so that tells me the band clearance is probably correct. In other words, where it should be. Alright, if you try to spin the shafts with the transmission laden with fluid, it's going to be difficult. You're going to want to have a glove on or maybe use a rag or something. Otherwise it's going to hurt your hand. But these are both spinning nice and free. So you can hold the front, spin the rear, make sure there's, you know, nothing kind of bonding them together, so to speak. That would indicate a massive catastrophic internal hard part failure. So I don't feel that. So the wiring harness, if you, for whatever reason, wanted to reuse your harness, or maybe you're just doing some corrective work, there is a special tool that you can use to collapse those locking tabs. And that's this tool right here. I have no intentions of reusing this thing, but excuse me, I'll kind of show you how it works. So you have a gap in the tabs right here, and that's what this cutout is for. So you just place this on here. Make sure it's up against the case. You got all the locking tabs collapsed, and then you just go in and tap it in. That's assuming it wants to stay put. So just like that, and you won't break the tabs. Alright, make sure you take your converter O-ring seal off before you do anything further. So 13 millimeter on all these bolts. Again, factory pans, they use 10 millimeter bolts, or 17 of them total. My guess is he had this pan off. All these bolts are loose. You know, he shipped the transmission system, so you have to have as much fluid out of here as you possibly can before you ship it. You know, it gets shipped in on a pallet. That's how this one came in. I mean, he certainly could have drained it, but he may have taken it off just to get whatever residual fluid out of there. You know, over and above what you can get out with just the drain plug. I mean, I'm just speculating. I don't know that for a fact. If not, if he just drained it via the plug here, then, you know, we have roughly half of these bolts loose, and that's not good. And it's looked like a B&M pan, but usually they have their logo, or, you know, something to indicate it's a pan, or you know, B&M manufactured pan, and I don't see that here. Yeah, it looks like something went awry in the case. Something indeed went awry. Okay, so just checking to make sure that I'm still in view. So we have our filter, and we have a filter pickup extension tube. Okay, if you run a deep pan, this is mandatory. So if you don't have a pickup extension tube, there's nothing holding the filter in place other than what little tension that exists between the area where it goes into the seal and the seal itself, and that's not going to be sufficient to hold it in place in the long run. So here's the seal, and then he's got another seal. This wiring harness is original. So that's kind of the first red flag for me. It appears to be original. It does not look like a replacement, and same with the PWM solenoid and the shift solenoids. It does not look like any of the electronics were replaced in this unit. Other than maybe this thing. That looks new to me. I mean, it could be an OEM replacement. I always use Rostro, they're readily available. So, you know, I actually don't use the Delphi harnesses. I mean, I believe they've long since been out of production as far as I know, but this one wants to fight me. So I'm just trying to be careful with this thing. Get it all from one piece. It's a good reference harness. It's not like I would ever reuse these things, but I mean, it's in perfect shape. It could very well be new OEM, new old stock, but the solenoids are definitely, at least this one is definitely not new, the PWM solenoid. Alright, 10 millimeters, all these bolts except for the pressure switch manifold assembly, they get an 8 millimeter socket. So I'm curious to see if he's running a block off plate for the third and fourth accumulators. That's what I would run. On any high performance build, you're going to dual feed the direct clutch. You want to run a block off plate for that third and fourth accumulator. So the stall speed on this thing is 25% on the converter. I also have the torque converter, so depending on what we find in here, it's more than likely going to be necessary to go through it again. If you have, you know, some kind of soft part failure in the unit with, you know, all kind of contaminant, clutch material, you know, metal and whatnot, shavings, you obviously don't want to put that back in with the converter. Given it's like putting basically dirty clothes on an otherwise clean body, makes no sense. Okay, 97 and up, they did away with this long feed pipe that runs from the front of the valve body to the back of the case, and they have a much smaller feed pipe that runs from roughly this area here into the same spot in the case to lubricate that case bushing. But, you know, I mean, basically that just makes this design of valve body incompatible with the 97 and up center loop design for the ladies. Okay, 9" 7" and up, the valve body never changed as far as I know. I could be wrong about that. If so, I'll annotate the video. But there were a few different variants of valve bodies that went into the 91 to 96 transmissions. They changed in either 92 or 93 to coincide with the elimination of the EPC cleaning cycle and that torque signal compensator valve in the accumulator housing over here. And they changed again in either, I think, 95 with the third and reverse bore plug and low reverse bore plugs for the check balls that are in the valve body itself. Sonics makes a bore plug kit for these valve bodies, but it's only for 95 and above. So if you have a 91 to 94, unfortunately they do not make that, as far as I know. I mean, that's as of about 6 months ago. And today is December 3rd, 2024, so. All right, let's take a look at this valve body. We do have a block off plate. So it looks like we have a Jake's Performance kit installed. Got a check ball here. And I'm making a big mess. So Jake's Performance, CK Performance, and a few others make valve body kits for performance applications. And so these kits are basically recalibration kits that usually come with parts and components to dual feed the direct clutch, block off the 2.3 and 3.4 accumulators, and they will give you, kind of instructions and guidance for drilling the feed orifices in the spacer plate. Okay, so the block off plate uses 10mm bolts, and the typical torque spec for these is 130 inch-pounds. 120 to 130, I would say. Okay, CK Performance kits come with a spacer plate. I think Jake's does too. And they have different versions of these kits, so you can purchase, kind of a more limited kit for, I guess cost effective. And then you can purchase a comprehensive kit that includes parts and components for the interiors, such as high rate return springs for the intermediate and direct clutch. So you would swap out the factory return spring assembly for the high rate versions of those springs. That leads to crisper shifts. Reduces the likelihood of centrifugal apply when driving through those clutch packs in earlier gears. So, let's see, no check balls here. 1, 2, 3. Looks like the direct clutch check ball, my guess is that was not included as well. This is the number 9 check ball for reverse. It is typical to delete that. And then there should be one here. I think that's your coast clutch check ball. So, assuming that check ball that was down here went to here, this is kind of as expected for a performance application, especially if you're running Jake's kits. He's a fan of omitting the direct clutch check ball. All right. This over here, our spacer plate. All right, let's take a look at orifice sizing here in the plate. So here's second gear, this is third, and this is fourth. Second gear, the plate looks like it had been drilled. This looks like about 125, at least 125 thousandths of an inch. third looks like it was drilled about the same, maybe slightly smaller, and fourth looks like it's about maybe 86 to 93 thousandths. So for a 2500 stall converter, this is actually a little bit aggressive. Though my guess is that the builder drilled this with keeping with the fact that this the customer's engine can make up to 700 horsepower, but that's a little aggressive, so he's going to need a new plate, more than likely. I have to actually measure the orifice sizing in that plate. And I just use drill bits to see, you know, which ones will fit, and that will tell me, you know, what we're working with. So, the valve body itself, what I always like to do is install a new PWM valve from Sonics. This looks like it has the factory PWM valve installed. 1, 2, and 2, 3 shift valve springs. Again, I can't tell if that's been done. Let's see. So, and again, I can't tell if bore plugs are installed. This is a, looks like he's got a 92 valve body on this thing. So with a 91 and 92 valve body, and this may be applicable to 93 as well, they had the first design Bosch silver can style electronic pressure control solenoid. So the procedure for here to update to the Borg-Warner or Holley EPC is to drill the valve body so that you can vent the EPC, because these are non-vented. So vent versus non-vent basically means you have a vent hole either built into the EPC itself, which was true for the Bosch units or Bosch EPCs, but for these Borg-Warner Holleys, they're non-vented, so this valve body does not have, or at least doesn't appear to be drilled for that vent provision. Transgo has instructions on exactly how to do that as part of their shift kit. So, you know, all the shift kits for these units, Transgo includes detailed instructions on what you have to do to update your valve body if you're working with a 91 or 92 valve body, so that you can install a replacement electronic pressure control solenoid, you know, the kind that are made by Borg-Warner / Holley, because those are the only ones available for these earlier units. Bosch started making the EPCs in 2004 and up, but it's not really applicable for these units. All right, let's take a look at the low reverse assembly. So we may see a billet piston in here from Sonics, we may not. At 700 horse, I would recommend putting one in. I also would want to see heavy duty pressure plates in the intermediate and direct clutch. So it looks like we have the factory piston. This is well, it's a gasket. This is an early design. So TH400 early 480s up to 96. They had a flat dome style piston, but in 97 and up, it went to a more curvature design. So you have like a true dome in the middle, if you will. Put that in there. All right, so you have your little E-clip. Seems like it's, I don't know, jammed or stuck or something. It does not want to come out. I'll have to tap it out. All right, these pins are different. They're selective, and it's based on the number of grooves in the pin. So it looks like what was done here is this was modified so that this pin looks like it was lengthened so that it can apply the band and not have too much clearance. So if the builder did that, that's perfectly fine. And that ensures that there's no problems with too much band clearance, too much travel in this servo. Ideally, you want to see somewhere in the neighborhood between 90 and 125 thousandths, you know, or just get it as low as you can without dragging on the band. I mean, that's kind of the name of the game. Okay, so it looks like seals were omitted here. I believe that's part of Jake's instructions, but I'm not 100% on that. I'll have to double check. If so, that would explain the 1-2 accumulation, or excuse me, the 1-2 harsh upshift between that and the plate being hogged out to what appears to be at least 125 thousandths of an inch. All right, let me grab up the rest of these check balls. So, as I mentioned earlier, you always omit your check balls 5 and 6 here for running a block-off plate. You can omit the direct clutch check ball as well for firmer apply, and same with the reverse check ball, but all the others should be installed. All right, here's your coast band servo. These changed also. 1999 they went to a wider band, so they changed the pin length, the servo design, and the band. You can retro that whole service pack back to any year 4L80 that originally took the more narrow band design, but you gotta do it as a combined service pack, so all of those parts together, not just individually. So in other words, don't retro just the band or just the servo, or you'll have problems. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave this on because this will keep this pull out of the way while I get the gear set out of there. Alright, so you have a nail basically to retain your selector shaft. You want to be real careful when removing this nail. Okay, just smartly pry up on it. These can break off into the case, and if they do, then, well, you're going to be stuck. So the nut itself for holding the rooster comb in place is 15 millimeter. And you want to cinch this on real tight so it doesn't come loose on you. So here's the arrangement for the parking rod assembly. Here, I'll show. Probably didn't even catch that. So, just goes in here between the two retention tabs on the rod itself. So here and here. And obviously the manual valve engagement stud faces the case. Alright, so that's everything on the belly of the case. Like I said, I'm just going to leave that there. Now I want to remove the center support and overdrive feed bolts. New ones will come in the kit. It's not recommended you use them. I mean, this one more so than this one. This bolt's usually pretty durable. So 30 foot-pounds on this one, 30 or 32 foot-pounds, and then this one gets 12 foot-pounds or 144 inch-pounds. So this one is a Torx 40, and this is 12.38. Oops. All right. The only other bolts left are the ones holding the two pump halves together, so after that it's all just maneuvering stuff out of the case. Alright, I would expect to see an upgraded boost valve here. I like to use the Sonic's O-ring boost valve, as well as a lube regulated pressure regulator valve. However, if the stock valve is reinstalled, I would expect to see a line to lube hole drilled in the pump cover at the respective location. So for the pump body, I would expect to see a 1/4 inch drain back. So in other words, the drain back in the pump body drilled out to 1/4 of an inch. So we'll see if that's, you know, actually been done or not. So you can take these pumps out using whatever method. I typically like to take them out by just simply levering and you know, using a pry bar or whatever, a screwdriver. And that's usually sufficient to get them out. Once you get it started, it comes right out. Get that out of the way. All right, so we have our selective washer. This sets front end play. Let's see how thick it is. Looks like it's about 104 thousandths. I have a whole drawer full of these, all different thicknesses. 90 thousandths is the most common, at least the one that I see most often. And then you have your, I think 80 thousandths or 82 thousandths, 71 thousandths, 60 thousandths, and then upwards from there you have, I want to say 97 or 98 thousandths, and then, you know, 1 or 2 sizes bigger than that. Let's get this pump O-ring off. Again, the one downside with these gloves is just lack of dexterity. Is what it is. All right. I'm gonna get you a little bit closer so we can go through the pump and check it out. As I was mentioning earlier, he was raising concerns about noises coming from the front of the transmission. He speculated it could be coming from the pump itself, so we'll see if there's like wear and scoring and whatnot. All right, 13 millimeter, 18 foot-pounds on all these bolts when you go back with it. So you have 4 different valve trains in this pump on the cover. So boost pressure regulator, TCC limit and enable, and TCC control. All right, so we have a wear plate installed. So that's always a good mod. So when you ever have a wear plate, you want to just make sure it's not excessively scored. Okay, so for pump gears, 8/10 thousandths to roughly 2 thousandths clearance on your body to deck surface, and then for 3 to 4 thou clear on between the the driven gear and the inner diameter. I have no idea what these are. I mean, it looks correct visually, but that doesn't mean anything. A little bit of scoring here. I'll have to take a closer look once this gear set's cleaned off. So with these pump bodies, you can install a late pump body, so 97 and up pump body on any year 700, or excuse me, 700, any year 480E, does not matter. You cannot install an early pump body or pump cover assembly, stator support, whatever you want to call it. You cannot install either an early pump body 91 to 96 or an early stator support assembly onto a late case, meaning the 97 and up with the center lube design. So he's got, see, a seal. Somebody had painted the torque converter and they didn't even let it dry before they installed it. I don't know who did that, but working surfaces appear to be okay. You want to check wear in the crescent. As you can see, there's some wear here in the crescent area. So you see that. Okay, like I said, when I get this all cleaned up, it'll be more obvious to me when I look at it to see how much wear is present. Alright, so there is a piece of something here. It was just sitting in the bell, came out with the pump. I wonder what the hell that is. We'll find out soon enough, I imagine. It looks like a washer from the planet. Maybe a piece of a bushing or something. Might be the overdrive planet, who knows. Alright, let me see if I can get the seal out, because I want to see if that drain back was drilled. So, get in here with the chisel. This bushing is getting in my way. Alright, I'll have to take this out later, and I'll flash a picture on the screen, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, for the journal, we see some wear here. You obviously want to check this. He might need a pump. Check splines, the converter, and then of course your working surfaces. Again, you would not actually do a serious inspection on anything until you have everything cleaned off. So I have to disassemble, get all these valve trains out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically reassemble it as it is without any kind of, improved valves or whatever, to do a vacuum check and make sure that all these, all these valve trains and their respective bores are sealing as they should. 15 inches of vacuum is what you want, or 15 HG. This looks like it was drilled. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, to be honest with you. This could be wallowed out to 125 thousandths. Actually, I don't think it was. I'm looking at bushings. These bushings don't look like they were replaced to me. So that's basically kind of a cardinal sin when it comes to these transmissions. I mean, look at the amount of wear on this bushing here. So that would tell me that none of these bushings in the pump were actually replaced, and there was excessive bushing clearance between the converter hub and the the bushing in that pump body. Alright, let me turn the case so it faces you, and we can get everything else out of here. Alright, fresh battery installed. Let me tidy up the bench a little bit here, and then we'll go ahead and get this whatchamacallit facing us. Watch this valve by. Let me get it out of the way. Put everything in that giant pan. Alright, so first things first, let's go ahead and take out our overdrive assembly input shaft deal. So we have our snap ring, and this is what I was referring to. So you're going to have some clearance between the planet and the snap ring and the groove in the input shaft. This is a billet shaft, so good there. Always like to see billet. On these higher horsepower, higher performance applications, I mean, if you can afford it, put billet parts wherever you can. Curious to see if there's like a super drum installed, a 36 with a 36 element super heavy duty intermediate sprag assembly. That would be cool. Alright, we got that. I gotta take this out. Duh. I'm a little overzealous to view the coast clutches. Kind of dumb. So not being mindful of camera angles. Another faux pas. Come on. Get up in there, grab that snap ring and take it off. There we go. Yeah, my dexterity is so bad I had to actually force the thing against my belly to do it. So we'll check splines, check journals, check splines back here. So nice billet steel input shaft. Alright, plan it. And coast clutch, so we have, looks like factory spec frictions in the coast clutch. And then we have our early style overdrive roller clutch one-way assembly. I like these a little better than the late style, though you can certainly make the argument that it doesn't matter. So check your pinion gears. You know, just wiggle them from side to side to see if there's any side play. Check your base plate. You can disassemble this whole planet and rebuild it, put new needle bearings here in the pinions if you need to. Check your splines. Check your inner race. It should be mirrory smooth. Check your captured bearing. Make sure that it's not making noise. Okay, pull it out of a transmission. It should be nice and smooth. Should be plenty of fluid in there to lubricate it. Check this area here, the journal and these splines. Make sure they're not boogered up. So all things you would check for on any planet, basically. Put this thing in here. Get it out of the way. All right, let's take a look here. The rest of this pack. The overrun clutch is what we call a non-regulated pack. There's no selectives in which to deal with. So 3 and 3. He's got tubular steels, that's good. So no concerns here. Again, it's up to you if you want to use factory frictions or not, even in a high performance build. If it's an all-out race vehicle, I would opt for better frictions, a better clutch module. This is a street strip deal, so he's not looking to race this all the time, but he will take it to the track every once in a while, so hence why, you know, we want to care for those times where that's being done. So this should have been drilled 125 thousandths or an eighth. That lubes, provides more lubrication into this area in here. So this is your Sprag lube, overdrive roller clutch lube. Bushings do not appear to have been replaced. So you got to replace the bushings in the 4L80Es because they are very, very hard on bushings. All right, let's get this out. So here's your overdrive clutch pack. See if tubular steels were installed. They were. Factory frictions. So with the 4L80Es, in most scenarios, factory frictions, believe it or not, are perfectly fine. Even for performance, even for high performance, Borg-Warner high energies and like to say the direct clutch, the forward clutch, it's perfectly fine. You don't really need anything super fancy when it comes to clutch modules in either the 4L80, either generation or the TH400s. You just need to care for things like hydraulics. You want to make sure that your line pressure management is where it needs to be per the application, and you want to make sure that your clutch clearances are appropriate for what you're doing. Want to run them on the looser side for anything real high RPM so that you don't drag in earlier gears. So steel friction. So these steels and these clutches look to be fine. No signs of heat or slippage or whatever. They do have scoring, so there's some contaminant present in the unit that is scoring up the surfaces, so I will not reuse them. I'll put a new steel module in here. So signs of overheating, sticking or bonded pump to case gasket to the case. So definitely some overheating going on with this unit. I'm gonna get this crap off now so I don't have to deal with it later. Alright, next is our forward drum. So it looks like we have an aftermarket billet clutch hub that's rollerized. Always a good idea. I like the Sonics hub, but this might be a Cone Racing hub. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which hub you use as long as it's from a reputable manufacturer. You don't want any kind of Chinese hubs in here. They'll break on you. So forward clutch clearance anywhere from like 40 to 60 thousandths is fine. So let's see what we got. So most of the hubs, they will reuse the factory inboard thrust washer, and they will rollerize the outboard side, the side that faces the direct drum. So just check this bearing. It's a Torrington bearing. It's just an open design. That's fine. And then you have your other Torrington bearing over here. So check it as well. I'll get it off in a second. Alright, so it looks like we have, these look like direct clutch steels. And a bonded piston, so this is a later model drum. Forward clutch is on in all gears, so once you put the vehicle in a forward pattern range position, drive, D3, 2, or low, these stay on. They never come off until you stop the vehicle and put it into some other position like reverse, park, or neutral. So clearance isn't super critical, but you don't want excessive clearance that could produce harsh engagements, and you obviously don't want it too tight because then it could potentially drag when you're in park, neutral, and bind a little bit in reverse. Common sense, really. These steels look fine. Let me see how thick they are. So whatever happened somewhere else in the case to produce all that clutch material. So these are 90 thou, these are direct steels. 77 thou, 76 thou is how thick the forward steels normally are, but when you measure your clearance, make sure that you measure the distance between the ledge here and the top friction, because once you either put air or do a feeler gauge or whatever it is you're going to do, if you put it between the top of the pressure plate here and the snap ring, it's only going to give you that travel from this ledge to the bottom edge of the snap ring, or bottom side of the snap ring rather. And so that's not going to tell you the full picture when it comes to clearance. You won't get an accurate measurement. It will be understated. So you don't need high rate return springs in here for anything, for any reason. But you do need them in the intermediate and direct for very high horsepower, high RPM applications. All right, let's look at the direct clutch. Hang on. Yes, I need a special tool because these gloves don't allow me to grip it like I normally would. So direct clutch, you want roughly 10 thousandths of an inch clearance per friction disc installed. So 60 to 65 thousandths, maybe 70 thousandths if we're running a 6 clutch stack in here, which would be a good idea. Let's see if that's what we have. 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, we do. So there's heavy-duty choline-coated backing plates available from CK Performance and possibly others. I like waffle-style frictions in this clutch pack for these and TH400s. So I'm wondering here if he decided to swap in forward. Yeah, he did. So we have 77 or 70 thousandths thick forward clutch flat steels, no cushion plate, and that's how he was able to achieve a 6 clutch stack. No signs of slippage here. These are the forwards, these are the directs. These almost look like the traditional paper style, and these look like the high energy. Alright, so for your sprag, you have a spiral lock snap ring. This is a feature for the later drums. Let's see, did he drill a bleed orifice? He did, so we have a nice bleed orifice here. So anytime you're doing anything high performance, you want to drill a bleed orifice 60 thousandths or so in the direct drum to supplement the natural bleed orifice, or I should say the factory bleed orifice system in that little ball there, ball capsule in the underside of the drum. So that's this ball here. And then you want to make sure that your snap ring, the spiral lock ring, is actually engaged on both locking tabs. I don't know if this was replaced either, to be honest. If I can get it off. So he, as far as I know, does not have like a complete build sheet that shows every single part that was installed in the unit. But I'll ask him if he, you know, if he does happen to have one. So standard 34 element sprag. These are very, very strong. I mean, you know, if you were doing something beyond, you know, significantly beyond 700 horsepower, maybe 800 and up, I would recommend going with a billet drum with the, you know, super heavy duty 36 element sprag. But the 34 element sprag is a very, very good one-way assembly. Yeah, I don't know if this is new, so I'm going to replace it because, I mean, unless he has a build sheet indicating it was new, I don't want to take the chance on it, you know, failing or something. Alright, let me go get the snap ring out of here and we can look at that bleed orifice that was drilled, because it looks like it was drilled, you know, perfectly. You know, how he has it here, it's roughly 180 out from the bleed orifice from the factory, and it appears to be where it should be. I mean, like, I actually drill mine so that it either straddles this parting line here or it's slightly inboard of it. The main thing though is you want to make sure that the bleed orifice does not interfere with the perimeter seal on the piston. So whether you're running an aluminum piston with a traditional lip seal or a bonded piston like this one, you just don't want to have interference there, because A, it'll affect your bleed off, and B, it may cut the seal surface there, and obviously that's no good. Alright, stand by. Okay, so I recommend, if you're using like a, you know, 3-legged return spring compressor like I use on the press, use like an intermediary between these return spring assemblies and your press tool or your compressor. This is out of a 6R140. It's the rear bearing race, so works nicely, and you can get them anywhere. Okay, I'm not sure if these are high rate return springs or not. I'll have to check and see what Jake includes in his kit. It's been a while since I've used his kits in the past. It's been forever, but I believe he does include high rate return springs. For some reason I can't tell by feel, but here's the piston. So if you're running OEM pistons, they're National Seal brand, and they will say forward and direct right here. I mean, it's difficult to see, but if you look hard enough or close enough, you'll spot it. And this area here on the inboard side of the piston, this is wider than the forward drum piston, which I didn't take out. Okay, notice the absence of your drum lip seal. That is so that you can dual feed the direct clutch internally. So take a look. See the high reverse feed passage is blocked. No, it's not. So the high reverse feed passage is not blocked in the case. So it's open to the center support. So I'll have to check the procedures that Jake's calls for to see how the hydraulic circuitry is cared for when you do not block the high reverse feed passage in a dual feed situation in the 4L80s and TH400s. The circuitry down here is the same for both of those units. So, like I said, I'm not super familiar with his stuff. I will check it, and if I can, if it's like a simple explanation, I'll annotate the video so that you have that information. So there's the bleed hole. It's right there in the crevice. Get that so it focuses. Alright, so there's the bleed hole. It's right there. So that's basically ideal. And that's how you want to set up the direct clutch for high RPM, you know, street strip applications as far as preventing centrifugal apply and clutch drag in first and second gear. All right. So we have our coast band, narrow design band. I mean, this really isn't much of a factor in street strip. It's more of a heavy duty thing. If this was a heavy duty unit, in other words, we're using this in a truck that we're going to be towing and hauling frequently, or in a working vehicle like a snowplow or something, then, you know, we want to use maybe a different band, you know, update to the later design. So for intermediate clutch, what I'm looking for here is, in addition to the thick, heavy duty intermediate clutch snap ring, I want to see that, you know, in fact here, before I even take it out, let's check clearance. Okay, it looks like he's got maybe about 50 thousandths clearance. Maybe less. In a high RPM application, you actually want a little bit more clearance than that. Ideally, you want to be anywhere from 80 to 120 thousandths. Spec for this clutch is 125 thousandths, in other words, 1/8, all the way down to, I think, 40. In a factory application, 40 thou clearance is fine. But for high performance, you want it a little bit larger than that to allow for, you know, the clutch to breathe when you're shifting from first to second at 6 to 75,000 RPM in first gear, you know, driving through the intermediates. I'm sorry, I gotta reach in here and grab this because I'm not able to do it otherwise. So Chrysler A518 Ford clutch snap rings are what you're going to use for these. This is a super thick snap ring, which is good. I mean, you want a beefy snap ring. The other consideration is a billet steel intermediate clutch pressure plate. You can use those as well. And this one is right up on there. I mean, this might be 106 thousandths thick. I know that was probably painful for you to watch, so I apologize for that. But 106 thou thick. Normally you run the 88 thousandths thick snap ring in here, and sometimes you'll run the 74, 75 thousandths thick snap ring. I mean, this is fine as long as you have enough clearance, but I'll be honest, I don't think there was enough in here. Let's see, we have 4 frictions, 4 steels. So this appears to be, I mean, consistent with a normal intermediate clutch. So 4 and 4, no signs of slippage here. So here's the backing plate. As I was mentioning a second ago, it's a good idea for really, really high horsepower, high RPM applications to run a billet steel backing plate. We don't see that here. Alright, so now we have our rear gear set. So center support snap ring has to come out. It's a beveled snap ring, so you want the beveled side facing rearward, facing down as you're assembling this thing, you know, on the fixture, on the bench, or whatever. I think this screwdriver is not as effective as it used to be. I had to cut it down a couple of different times. I was breaking the ends off where I was, you know, I had ground the tips down a little bit, and it's not as quick to grab up on the snap rings like it used to be. So this is the flat side, and then this is the beveled side. Beveled side faces front. Alright, so now all you're going to do is just carefully lift while you kind of push forward in the output shaft. Lift up on the center support, and the entire gear train will come forward, the whole back half of the transmission. That's assuming you make a clean lift. So we still have the band, the anti-fretting ring, and the bearing in there. The rear case was rollarized. So this is the gear set. So as you can see on the center support, take off everything here. So we have the second from the top sealing ring omitted for dual feeding. And here is our bearing. So you have the center support, the sun gear thrust bearing. That's this thing right here. And the race for the center support's right there. So it just goes like this. Alright, looks like this has been cut off. Talk about that in a second. So we have our washer here. This bushing has not been replaced. That's original. At least it has all the hallmarks of being original. Let's see, sun gear. It's not necessary to increase the diameter of that orifice. You do have an intermediate sprag lube. Let's see, and this should be walled out to 1/8 on later models. So 3 different types of sealing rings available for the stator and the center support. They have scarf cut Teflon rings that you could buy. They also have what you see here, the later model interlock plastic style rings. And then there is the one-piece Teflon sealing rings. I haven't looked at that yet. One-piece Teflon sealing rings for the earlier model units. Now, you can use whatever style sealing ring you want. It just doesn't matter. But I like to use the Teflon one-piece rings that you have to size when they're available, just because, I don't know, it's just my preference. I mean, it's literally builder's preference, that's it. You know, there's no other rationale for it. So this is a little curious. I'm not sure why there's not all 12 springs installed. I would like to see 12 springs in this location for, again, you know, reducing the likelihood of clutch drag. I mean, I guess if you're going to run it, you know, with only these, let's see, 6 springs, then you know, you orientate them like you see here. But again, not my preference. Okay, this piston also changed, I think in 95 or 96. And that coincided with the changes to the clutch pack itself. So they make billet pistons. You know, you can install them if you want. It's not, strictly speaking, necessary at the power levels that we're working with here. But again, builder preference. I mean, there's no amount of theoretical upper limit to the amount of money you can spend on building a performance transmission. I mean, you know, I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find another area where you can improve or upgrade or update, regardless of how much money you've already spent. So the center loop design will have, you know, it'll be completely different. You'll have your cooler line fitting going in. It's either this side or this side. I'm not, it's in the case like this. This is the 6 o'clock position, cooler line fittings, so I guess it'll be on this side. Yeah, so second design, the bushing is different than the first design. So as you can see here, you have a large rectangular cutout in the bushing that does not exist for the second design. They have loopholes up here, and then, you know, other loopholes positioned in other locations on that bushing. Yeah, it's not gonna fit in there. All right, let's see, sun gear. It's got the usual amount of wear to it. This beveled side always faces down, so when you're assembling it, it goes down like this with the flat side facing up. The little roller assembly does look new to me. So he's got the support in here. That's for earlier models, which is fine. I mean, this is the same, I imagine the same planetary or, you know, reaction carrier that came in this transmission originally. It's got some grooving on it. So you want to inspect this surface. If it's excessively grooved and you can feel it, like I could feel this, then it's probably a good idea to replace the planet. There were 2 different styles of band that were produced for these units, and you know, there was a grooved style and a smooth style, so to speak. Get this fretting ring out of here. Okay, these began going into TH400s years and years ago. I think, I want to say 68, 69, 70, somewhere in that general area. So we have a smooth band. Looks like upon installation, the band got a little, you know, a little bit dinged up there. You can see it here. So I'll replace this band. It looks a little dark to me. This may be the source of the friction material that we saw in the pan. The band could have been dragging. Let's put it here. Okay, so this is a heavy-duty return plate, you know, for your springs. This is a good idea to install. Much more robust than the factory return spring assembly for anything high performance. And then the last thing that's in the case is the output thrust bearing. So we'll get that out, and then we'll look at the rear plan. We'll disassemble this section, and then that'll be it. So as I'm looking deep inside the case, I believe I see a TH400 bushing. That's what is common for folks to use. You can use an early 4LED pump bushing in that rear case location as well. But when you install this bearing, you want to install it like this. So you want the outer portion of the bearing facing you, facing up if it's on the fixture, because if you do it this way, this inner portion of the bearing is going to rotate directly on top of that bushing and then eventually cut into the bushing, especially in high RPM applications. That bearing feels fine. Can't tell if there's a shim back here or not. Nope, there's not. He put a bearing and no shim, so wonder what end play was in the rear. I mean, I could have measured it, I guess, but I mean, I would have taken a lot of time to set it all up. I mean, you really need to have this in a fixture to measure it. So this 4-tab thrust washer goes here on the output carrier, aka rear planet. So this is an early sun gear shaft or intermediate shaft. It's got a lube passage that goes through and through. The later 97 and up shafts do not have that. So they changed. It's solid because the lube is coming from a different direction. So this is the sun gear shaft. These bushings were not replaced. When you replace these bushings, you almost always have to clearance them with sandpaper. I mean, I think I've had 1 or 2 480s that I've done where that wasn't necessary. But you want to make sure you align this lube hole here with this one here in the sun gear, and so that you can go through and through for lube oil. So check these splines, a journal, check the gears, teeth on the gears, check these splines for both sides of the sun gear. If you have lubrication failures, typically you'll have a complete and total abject hard part failure, catastrophic grenade job in the back of the case. So one of the concerns, especially with early 480s, TH400s, is the amount of play that exists between the reaction and output carrier assemblies. And so the way to mitigate that is to install a slightly thicker 4-tab thrust washer at this location here. CK Performance includes those in his kits. And so you want a little bit of play, a little bit of spacing, but you don't want an excessive amount of spacing for fear that under very high RPM, damage could be sustained. All right, let's see if I can get this out with minimal fanfare. The snap ring can be very tough, and it's wanting to fight, of course, when I'm filming, but it has to come out if you want to look at the rest of this assembly. I'm going to move the camera so I can put it in the hole in the bench here. Make it a little bit easier on me and you. Okay, this bushing is heavily worn. This might be a new bushing. Not really sure. It'll get replaced regardless, but hard to tell. My guess is it's probably not new. I mean, in keeping with what I've seen so far when it comes to bushings and the lack of replacement, my guess is that it's used, pre-existing like all the other ones. Okay, so this is your final Torrington bearing assembly as far as its order in the case. So I like to use green assembly lube in all these open style bearings when I go back with it. And so wear on the journal. And this is the final Torrington bearing assembly we'll look at. In 99 and up units, they changed the planetary carrier, the pinion gear dimensions. They made them taller, so that changed the structure in here. So you will have a 41,000 shim, steel shim that goes in this location here underneath this bearing assembly. If you don't put that in there, then the sun gear will no longer be centered between the two planets and you'll have problems. So I'll look at the front carrier in a second. But you want to wiggle. I can't even, these gloves are so thick I can't even get in there. I can get in there with either my bare hands or my nitrile gloves, but I mean, you could spin them, make sure they feel okay. Make sure that there's not too much vertical play in them. You want to check here too. Make sure that none of these pinion shafts are loose. Make sure there's no heat damage like bluing or whatever. Check your teeth, and particularly the crests, but you know, the whole surface area. I mean, that's basically what you're looking for. Any signs of defects, any signs of damage. Lugs here for that output shaft. Okay, when it comes to these planets, do not spray brake cleaner into the pinions and then zip them dry with the shop air. That's a good way to damage them. I know I repeat this on numerous teardown videos, but like, I don't know, I'm not going to assume somebody watching has watched my other videos. I kind of always assume that you're watching my channel for the first time, so I try to go over everything that I can think of that you'd want to be mindful of when you're working on these units, or whatever transmission I'm happen to be, you know, tearing apart, so that at least you have the context you need. Get this out of the way. So there's a little snap ring here. So same deal, same type of inspection, physical inspection, visual, physical, make sure everything is good. I don't do inspections for real until all these parts are all cleaned up. Alright, it's the following day. We have the transmission all cleaned up, all the parts on the bench. A lot easier to inspect when they're not, you know, laden with fluid and whatnot. So I want to touch on a couple of things to kind of close the loop on the drivability symptoms, maybe provide a little bit more of an explanation as far as what was happening and why inside the transmission based on those symptoms. And then I want to cover a couple of things that I learned about the Jake's Performance Kit that I did not know at the time. You know, when I was tearing down the unit, I had had a conversation subsequent to that. So for those that are not familiar, just like I wasn't, I'll relay that information. So let's get a little bit closer to the bench. We'll take a look at some other parts, and then I want to just real quick touch on a couple things with the valve body, and then we'll be done. Alright, so we'll take one more look at the pump so you can kind of appreciate the full amount or extent of the wear here on the priming crescent, as well as the bushing. This is a 91 to 96 pump. You can tell by this large rectangular cutout. The 97 and up pumps all have a partition here, so you have two separate rectangular chambers, but the 91 to 96 pumps all have this large rectangular cutout. 97 up pump bodies will retro to any year 91 to 96 480E, but you cannot prospectively install one of these early bodies onto a later 97 and up 480. So I didn't have the seal off earlier, but kind of show you what this looks like now. This was not drilled out, so I always drill these out 1/4 of an inch for drain back. Just makes it a little bit more efficient, and it's an insurance policy against perhaps, you know, potentially having the seal blow out because too much fluid pools in behind the seal under high RPM. The other thing you notice right away here is the amount of protrusion on this bushing. This is a late pump body bushing, so 97 and up. So you don't really want to mix and match bushings. As you can see, it starts to interfere. I mean, I guess it'll create kind of a pseudo pocket in here on both sides, and that will restrict lube. So again, all things that should have been done differently when it comes to how this thing was put together. And then lastly, you have your extreme amount of bushing wear here. So what was happening was that there was so much clearance between the outer diameter of the converter hub and this bushing that the bushing was allowing the converter to drive the drive gear, forcing it against the priming crescent on the leading edge like this. And it was kind of going, you know, back and forth. I mean, I'm exaggerating this obviously, but that was what was making all that noise that the customer had reported to me. And so between the noise and the effect it had on the priming crescent, it ruined this pump body. So it cannot be used, at least not as is. If you have access to a vertical mill, you can put this in there. And if you have the program set up to, you know, cut this entire crescent and pocket for oversized gears, you can do that. And then the mill will face the deck surface so that this pump body can be used again. It'll be good as new, if not better. But gears themselves are no good. You got heavy scoring everywhere on both sides. The outer diameter of the driven gear is scored up heavily as well. No good. So that's what was going on with respect to all that noise in the front of the unit. Okay, bushings were not replaced. All these bushings are original factory. You see the letters FM here stamped into the center support bushing. I mean, they all have this. All the factory bushings installed in GM transmissions of this era had that FM code stamped into the bushing. This is the TH400 bushing. It was the rear of the case. This is the only bushing I believe was actually replaced. All right, so front planet, we're not going to reuse it. It's heavily warped here on the band surface. The band was either dragging or there was a lot of slippage going on, and likely, you know, both are true. This is, you know, truck that sees the drag strip every once in a while. So when you're doing burnouts, you're in manual low, and burnouts, of course, create a lot of heat and pressure, especially if line pressure inside the unit's not up to the task. And, you know, that's another concern. But the band surface on the band itself is also heavily worn and partially burnt. You know, band got chewed up a little bit here. This is probably, you know, an installation issue, just dropping the gear train in and nicking the band or something like that. Maybe using a hammer to try to seat it. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But bottom line is this band's no good. And, you know, some shops consider it a hard part. I never do. I always replace the bands. Jake's Stage 2 Performance overhaul kit is what I believe was installed in this transmission, and Jake gives you 2 new bands. He gives you a new coast band and a new low reverse band. So whoever built this, for whatever reason, didn't use the bands that came in Jake's kit, or that is a new band and it just got horribly mangled. Forward drum, you start to see the beginnings of a sealing ring groove here being cut into the inner diameter. That's a no-no. You don't want to use something like that. All of my 4L80Es, at least all the ones I've built recently, they get bored out here, the forward drum, the inner diameter, and a ductile iron sleeve gets inserted, and so that checkmates that, you know, sealing ring groove problem. If that's allowed to progress, you'll start getting delayed engagements and slipping into forward, and, you know, at that point the unit would have to come out again. All right, so one last thing about low reverse, and that's this little piston here, chunk missing out of it. I thought maybe I did that, and that's why I didn't really comment too much about it or didn't say anything, because I thought maybe I had destroyed it by pounding that pin out. However, after watching the footage, I realized that there was no chunk anywhere seen flying out, and I couldn't find anything anywhere on the bench or anywhere on the ground. So I believe this was installed just like this, you know. So somebody cut some major corners, especially when it comes to the more tedious aspects of building these transmissions, like bushing R&R. I mean, you know, unless you have all the right size blind hole pullers and bushing drivers and installers, bushings are a pain in the ass with these things. I mean, I got it down to a science where it only takes me literally about 10 minutes to pull out all the bushings, maybe 15 tops, and another 10 to 15 to reinstall them. But again, that's just because of repetitions and the right tools. All right, let's talk about the spacer plate and Jake's kit in general. So, like I said during the teardown phase of this video, I was not real up to speed, not sure exactly how his kit worked, and wasn't too familiar with how it was designed and all that stuff. So I had a conversation with Jakes yesterday afternoon, and he talked me through exactly what this plate does, how it's designed to enable true dual feeding of the direct clutch. I mean, that's going to be its most compelling attribute, if you will. All the procedures that you see out there on the net that talk about direct clutch dual feeding and TH400s 480Es, they all invariably tell you to plug the high reverse feed passage, and that's the procedure that I have always used, and that's what I show in my YouTube videos, at least on the performance buildups for these transmissions. So, like I said, I haven't used his stuff in years, but now that I know that this plate is specifically designed to enable true dual feeding, meaning two streams of apply fluid going into the direct clutch drum and behind that piston when shifting into third gear, I think I'm going to start using this kit more often. So he sells it as a complete kit as far as recalibration, a complete recal kit. He doesn't sell the plate individually. It comes with the block off plate and fasteners, along with a few other things that you need to recalibrate your 4L80E. And so part of this plate's design and function is to eliminate all the accumulators. So he eliminates the 2.3, the 3.4, and the 1.2. Okay, and it's that elimination of the 1.2 in combination with how this 1.2 shift feed orifice was drove, or was the reason for that brutal, harsh 1.2 shift that the customer had told me about. So if you look at the feed orifice size here, it's 150 thousandths. That's what I thought at first, but I wasn't entirely sure, so I didn't want to speculate. But this is 150 thousandths of an inch. Okay, now reminding the stall speed, it was 2,500. Okay, I talked to the customer again too, and I asked him, I said, "You sure your stall speed's 2,500 RPM?" And he said, "As far as I know, that converter is a 2,500 stall converter." I said, "Okay." And then I proceeded to explain to him what was going on and why his 1.2 shift was so, so harsh. So at 150 thousandths is what I typically see for 4,000 and up converter stalls, and that's what I do as well. The third and the fourth gear shift he had no complaints about. They were nice. This is roughly 125 thousandths of an inch, maybe 120. My 120 drill bit just slid inside of it, so it's got to be 125. And at 85, this is perfect for fourth gear, and you can really use this size all the way up to like 4,500 stall and be fine. So combination of deleted 1.2 accumulator and harsh, overly aggressively calibrated 1.2 feed orifice was the reasons behind that horrible 1.2 shift. So if you look at the 1.2 accumulator piston, recall it had no seals on it. That's specifically called for in Jake's instructions to leave off the seals on that accumulator piston. You don't need them. So that presumably allows for more fluid flow through, this whole cavity in the case and the underside of the low reverse piston. All right, one other thing I'll comment on is the the intermediate clutch clearance that we saw earlier. Here are the steels. So the steels show signs of drag as well as scoring, which could be drag, could be particulate matter. Like I said earlier, I didn't measure it, but I think the clearance in that pack was no more than 50 thousandths of an inch. I would recommend you run at least 70 in a very high RPM, high horsepower application. So I would have installed the 88 thousandths or maybe even the 75 thousandths thick Chrysler E518 forward clutch snap ring in that location in lieu of the thick 106 thick snap ring that was in there. All right, let me talk about the valve body real quick and then we'll be done. Here's the valve body all part. We have a couple of parts that are organic to Jake's performance, including the torque converter clutch regulator valve and the actuator feed limit valve. So the solenoids were all replaced. These are new shift solenoids. This is a new EPC. I mean, obviously, given that we have a 92 valve body, the silver can vented style Bosch solenoid was not present. The PWM solenoid was reused, so maybe he tested it. Whoever built this thing tested it and found it to be good. I have the equipment to do that too, both mechanically and electrically, but I don't reuse any electronic components because the likelihood that this would fail soon after rebuild, given it already has 150,000 or so miles on it and 30 years on itself, is much higher than a brand new one. You know, the likelihood that the brand new one would fail is like infinitesimally small. So we're putting all new solenoids, new pressure switch manifold assembly, new wiring harness into this thing, so it goes back together and I don't have to worry about nothing in that regard. So anyway, I'm going to do a build strategy video. You'll get to see everything we're going to be putting in. The Jake's Performance kit will go back in, but I have to order a new plate from them so that we don't have that 1-2 harsh upshift present anymore once this thing goes back to the customer. Alright, as always, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, go leave below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you on the next video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening.